Today you're going to learn how to set up a health system inside Unity. So if you want to create health for a player or for an enemy or other types of units, we're going to learn how to do that in this episode here. I do also want to mention that there's many ways to do this, and the way we're going to do it in this video is we're going to make something that can be reused again and again and again on many different types of units inside your game. And it's going to be a really good foundation for if you want to add more features to this particular health system at some point in the future. I do also want to mention before we get into what I have in here that we're not going to be building the actual health bar, but that will be a separate lesson in the next video because that is kind of a separate subject for itself. But we will be creating the actual health system so he can take damage and we can see the damage being taken inside the console. And then in the next video, we're going to have an actual UI that shows him actually losing health inside a health bar. So that is going to be for the next video. But in this video, we're going to build the foundation for the next video, if that kind of makes sense. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into what I have on the screen here. I have a very basic project, nothing specific, nothing complicated inside of it. I have a basic player that I just created by right-clicking and saying to the object, sprites. And then I created a square. And then inside the square, I just simply changed the color so we have a blue player. I did also add a rigid body 2D component, and I simply set the linear drag to 5 so he doesn't continue to not stopping when I start moving him. I set the gravity scale to 0. I set the collision detection to continuous. I set the interpolate to interpolate. And I also added a freeze rotation constraint so we don't have him rotating all over the place. And then I did also add a player controller script. And this is just a very basic script that just allows for him to move around the place. I can actually show it to you right here. It doesn't really do anything specific. It just lets my player move up and down, left and right. So this is just going to be to, in the next video when we actually add the health bar, to actually see the health bar follow the player. So that will be kind of a feature for the next video. It's not something you need for this particular video here. But I did actually add this to my players. And that is basically all I have. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to get started on building this health system in a customizable way where you can actually add it to multiple different game objects inside your game. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside my scripts folder. I'm going to go ahead and right click, create, C# script, and I'm just going to go ahead and name this one UnitHealth. Just so we know that this is the health for different units inside the game. Now inside the UnitHealth script that we created, we're going to go ahead and not make this a mono behavior script because we don't need to do anything in terms of the start methods or update methods or anything like that. We're just going to create a completely regular class that we can do something with inside our game. So I'm going to go ahead and delete everything inside the actual class here. And I'm also going to go ahead and remove the mono behavior because we don't, like I said, need it for anything. So what we're going to go ahead and do here is we're going to go ahead and create the fields, the properties, and the methods for this particular class related to the health. And just remember, you can add anything to this particular class at some point if you want to. I'm just going to create a bare bone UnitHealth type class that you can then customize in any kind of way afterwards. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and create our first 2 fields, or the only 2 fields for this episode here. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a comment, name it fields. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and create a integer data type. This is going to be private, by the way. Whenever we create fields, they should be private inside a class. As a default, if you don't add anything in front of it, like private or public, it is just going to be private. So you don't need to write anything in front of it, just so you know. So we're going to go ahead and create this integer here, and it's going to be called _current health. Now, it is kind of a naming convention because I do get asked about that. Whenever you create fields inside a class, it should have an underscore in front of it and start with a non-capitalized letter. Then I'm going to copy this, duplicate it, and I'm going to call this one current max health. So now we have 2 types of fields that we can then create as we instantiate this class here for a particular game object inside our game. So if I instantiate this unit health for my player, I can just add in how much max health should this player have and what should the current health of that player be. Underneath here, I'm going to create some properties. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a comment, say properties. Now, it is a common misconception, or actually it's a common habit of some people inside Unity to not create properties and instead just directly manipulate the fields. Some of you may just be used to seeing that. It is actually technically correct to be creating properties for each field and then change these fields through properties, essentially. So the way we're going to do that is I'm going to say we're going to have a public integer, and I'm going to call this one health, curly brackets, and then we're going to create a get and a set method inside this property, which means that we can grab the data and just show it inside our game, or we can change the data through these 2 methods here. So I'm going to say we have a get, curly brackets, and then underneath here, I'm going to say we have a set curly brackets. Now, as a default, inside a get method, you just kind of return the data. So I'm going to actually spell this correctly, say return current health, like so. And then inside set, we're going to say current health is going to be equal to a keyword called value. And you can actually see this turns blue as you write it, because that is not anything specific. It's not a variable or anything. It is actually a keyword, just like the set and the get and the public and int and all that stuff. So it is going to just assign a new value to current health. And this is essentially how we create a property for a field. Some people probably don't know this, but this is actually how you're supposed to be doing things. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go and duplicate it. And we're also going to create one for max health. And again, we just need to change a couple of things. We're going to say instead of current health, we're going to say current max health, and current max health equal to value. So now essentially whenever I need to show the health inside my game, I just need to refer to this particular property up here. Or if I want to show the maximum potential health of this unit here, I can just refer to max health inside my game. If some of you are a little bit confused about this because you haven't really messed with properties before, don't worry about it. We will actually get to see this in action in a little while. I'm going to create a comment and call this one constructor. Now a constructor is essentially a method inside this class here, but it is the method that we call upon as we instantiate this class here. For people who don't really know, a class is essentially just a template, and we can create copies, many different objects based off this class here. So if I want to create a health bar for my player, I can take this class, create a copy of it, make an object and put it on my player, and just essentially create player health for that player. Then if I have an enemy, I can do the same thing, create a copy of this template here, add it to my enemy. If I have another enemy, I can create another copy, paste it on my enemy, and essentially just do that. But when we create this object, when we instantiate this class here, it needs to fill in this data somehow. Like these fields up here currently are empty. There's nothing assigned to them. We could go up here and say current health should be equal to 100 or something like that. But because we're not doing that, but instead we're adding it as we actually instantiate the class and create an object based off the class here, we're going to add it inside the constructor here. Now, the way we create a constructor is essentially just creating a method that has the name of the class. So right now you can actually see the class name is UnitHealth. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say I want to create a method. I'm just going to say it's a public method, and I'm not going to add a data type or a void return type or anything like that. I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the name of this class, parentheses, curly brackets, and now we've actually created a constructor for this class here, which automatically gets called upon as we instantiate the class and create a copy for, let's say, the player, so the player can get some health. So I'm going to go inside my parentheses and say we want to make sure we pass in a integer data type. I'm going to call this one health. I'm also going to say I want to pass in another one called max health. And then we're essentially just going to assign these fields up here to the data that is being passed in. So I'm going to say current health is going to be equal to the health that we pass in. And I'm also going to duplicate it and say that we want to set it equal to max health and take my max health field that we have up there. So with this constructor here, what we can now do is we can actually start creating methods that actually do something with the player health. So if the player takes damage or if he wants to get healed at some point, then we can actually go ahead and do that using methods. You are probably a very creative person. You can probably come up with many different types of methods for a health system. I'm just going to go ahead and create one for damaging and healing the unit. So I'm going to create a comment. I'm going to call this one methods, just so we know what exactly is below here. And then I'm going to create my first method. This is going to be a public one because we want to actually be able to access it from outside the class. It's going to be a void data type, and I'm going to call this one damage unit, parentheses, curly brackets. Inside the parentheses, I do want to say I want to add a integer, which is going to be the damage amount. Let's say this is a health system that is on my player and a enemy hits the player. I need to know exactly how much damage that particular enemy is actually dealing to the player. And that is going to be what we pass into this method here. So I'm going to create an if statement, and I'm going to say inside the condition that if my current health is currently greater than 0, then take damage onto that unit. So we're just going to go ahead and say current health is going to be equal to, actually minus equal to the damage amount. And then I'm just going to duplicate this method and create one for healing the player, which means that we're just going to change up a couple of things. So instead of damage unit, I'm going to say heal unit. And then I'm going to say heal amount. I do also want to make sure that my current health is actually less than the max health. Otherwise, I don't want to add additional healing to it because that wouldn't make any sense. So I'm going to say that if my current health is lesser than the max current health, I'm going to take the heal amount and paste it in. And then I'm going to say I want to add instead of subtracting health to my player. Now, as I've set it up here, we could still potentially end up in a situation where we do actually heal greater than the amount of max health that we have. Because let's say I have 100 in max health, but currently my health is 90 and I receive healing, but I receive 20 in healing. Then I'm going to end up with 110 in health, which is not really what we're supposed to have. So what I can also do is I can run an additional if statement below here and just kind of check if the current health is greater than current max health. And if it is so, then we want to set the current health equal to the max health. Not equal, just equal to the max health here. Because in this way here, we avoid getting more health than what we're supposed to have inside the game. So this kind of fixes that small issue. And this is all we need to have for this particular unit health. And again, like I said, you can add any kind of methods or properties or fields to this particular method here. If you want to add additional stats to the health or something, you can do that in here. For now, this is just how we're going to build a basic system. Now, in this particular project, I do want to create health for my player. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to store the player's health inside a game manager, a global thing that just kind of takes care of the flow of the game. And because it is the player's health, then we need to determine if it's, below 0, because then it's game over. I want to store it inside my game manager. So what I'll do is I'll go inside my hierarchy, I'll right click, and I'm actually going to create a empty game object. And I'm just going to call this one game manager. And with the game manager here, I'll go down inside my scripts, I'll right click, and I'll create a new script. And I'm going to call this one game manager. And you can actually see, I cannot spell that today, game manager. You can actually see that Unity has created a unique icon for that particular script. And that's because that particular script is something that is, like I said, controlling the overall flow of the game. So this is a very important script to know where it is. So Unity just kind of changed the icon so we could easier find it inside our scripts folder. So that's just kind of a neat little thing there. So with this script created, I'm going to drag it upon my game manager. And I'm going to open it up inside my editor. I'm just going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to delete the update. And I'm also going to delete the comment here because we don't actually need to have this stuff in here. Now, what I'm going to do with this game manager script is I'm actually going to make it into what is called a singleton, which means that we're going to be able to access this script from anywhere inside any code just by referencing to this particular script here. So we don't need to instantiate it anytime or do anything specific, link it inside the inspector or anything like that. We just access it directly without having to do any of that inside our game. And as I'm saying that, I'm immediately thinking that some of you may be thinking, why don't we just do that for all the scripts so we can just access it from anywhere at any point? But do be aware that whenever we create a class and make it into a singleton, it means that there can only be one instance of that particular class. So if I make changes to whatever is inside this class here, it's going to change everywhere. So there can only be one of these classes here. And for a game manager, there should only be one of those. So it kind of makes sense to make that into a singleton. So in this particular case here, a singleton makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a public static game manager. And I'm just going to go ahead and name it the same thing as the name of the class. Then we're also going to go ahead and give it a name. So we're going to call it game manager, like so. Curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, I'm just immediately going to create a get and a set method for this. This is actually a property, and when we create it in this type of way, we automatically create fields for it. So this is kind of not really a shorthand, but just like another way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say we have a get, and we also have a set. Now, we do also want to make this set as private. And this is one of the pros of creating a property rather than creating fields, because we can actually set a protection level so we don't accidentally change something in the future, because this is a game manager that we're creating here. And we don't want to accidentally delete it or change it into something else. So we're going to set this as private. Then I do also want to go down inside my void start and change it into a void awake. So as soon as we start up the game, then this is going to get run immediately. And in here, I'm going to create a if statement. And essentially what I want to do is I want to make sure that there's no duplicates of this particular game manager static singleton inside my game anywhere. So if accidentally at some point another one is created, which shouldn't happen, but if it does happen at some point by mistake, then we want to make sure we actually delete whatever's being created here. So if we already have a game manager set inside the game and another one is created, we delete it. And we can simply do that by referencing to GameManager and say that we want to check if we do not have it set to null, which means that if it already exists inside the game. And I also want to check if GameManager does not equal to this. And then, of course, if this is actually true and there is another game manager being created, I just want to go in and say we want to destroy this that we have here. If not, then I actually want to go in and say else. I'm just going to go ahead and set my game manager equal to this. And this is essentially how you can create a basic singleton that you can access from anywhere inside your code. And with this created, we can actually continue to build upon our health system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside this particular game manager class that we have here and say I want to instantiate my player health. Because right now we have this template that we just created, but we haven't created a copy of it. We haven't created an object based off of it. So what I'm going to do inside my game manager is I'm going to create an object, which is going to be the player's health. Now, if this had been an enemy or some other kind of unit that we have multiple of inside the game, which isn't something that is really that important to have in the global game flow game manager script that we have here, because this is only supposed to be for essential things that controls the flow of the game. For example, if the player has no health left, then it's game over. So therefore, I'm deciding to put that inside this particular game manager. But something like enemy health or another type of unit that has health is not really something that is crucial for the overall flow of the game. So that is something you would just instantiate inside a script for that particular enemy, if that makes sense. But like I said, this is the player's health. It's pretty important to the overall flow of the game, so I'm putting it in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually instantiate the class that we created called UnitHealth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a public UnitHealth, because this is a UnitHealth data type, because we're actually referencing the UnitHealth script. I'm going to call this one _player health. So we actually know what this particular health is. And then I'm going to set it equal to unit health. And we do actually need to pass in the constructor parameters. So if I were to go back to my unit health, you can actually see the constructors down here at the bottom. We have two pieces of data that needs to be passed in here. And this has to be passed in here, which is going to be the current health and the max health allowed for that particular unit. So for this player here, I'm just going to go ahead and say I want to allow for 100 health to be passed in as the starting health. And I also want to set a max health as 100. So this is going to give the unit 100 health. And because we're instantiating a class and creating a new object, we do also need to add in the new keyword in front of our unit health constructor. So we make sure we do that. And just like this, we do actually have a health system for our player. So what I can do is I can actually go inside Unity and I can create a player behavior, because let's say I want my player to be able to take damage or something. We're just going to go and create a new script, C# script, and I'm going to call this one player behavior. And I'm just going to go and clean things up by deleting these comments. And I'm going to create two new methods, one for taking damage and one for healing the player. So once we do that, we then call upon this player health object that we just created inside the game manager, and then just change that from within these methods here. And that's essentially how we create a player health system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a private. I'm just going to call this one void player take damage, just so we have something, parentheses, curly brackets. I do want to pass in how much damage the player is actually taking, so we do need to pass in an integer and just call it something like damage. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and reference to the game manager static class, and we can do that because it is a static singleton right now. So we're going to say game manager dot game manager, and then we can just reference to anything within that class. And currently we do actually inside the game manager have a instantiated class called player health. So I can actually go ahead and take that, go back inside player behavior and say dot player health, and then I can just call upon any kind of method or property that I have inside my unit health class, because that is what this object is based off. So currently inside the unit health, if I were to scroll down, you can see we have a method called damage unit. So I can just go ahead and reference to that. I'm going to copy it, go inside my player behavior, paste that in. Then I'm just going to pass in the amount that we want to take as damage. So right now I'm just going to pass in the damage integer that we have up here. And then we're just going to close it off, make another copy so we can make one for the player healing, paste it down. And then I'm going to call this one player heal. I want to make sure that the integer is called healing so it actually makes sense. And then I'm just going to say that I want to not damage the unit, but I want to heal the unit and pass in the healing. And essentially, anytime you need to do anything when it comes to the unit health, you just reference to that particular class that we created called UnitHealth and call upon any kind of method or property that you want to do anything with that class. I could, for example, also say I wanted to debug.log, let's say the current health of the player. I can just go ahead and, again, reference to the GameManager and say I want to call upon _player health, which is the instantiated object that we just created. And I just want to reference to the health property within that particular class. And then I can just output the health of the player. And it really is as simple as that. So with that said, what we're going to do is we're going to go inside update. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that I want to check for a certain input. So right now I do actually have my notes over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy a if statement that simply goes in and says, if I press space on my keyboard, then I want the player to take damage by calling upon this method that we created down here. And I just pass in how much damage I want to take. So in this case, I'm just going to take 20 in damage. I do also want to debug how much health I have inside the game. So like I said, we can just call upon this particular instantiated object. And then I'm going to create another one where instead of pressing space, I'm going to press the left shift button. And that is going to heal my player 10 health whenever I press the shift key, essentially. So that would be picking up a health item or something inside your game. And this is also going to output how much health we currently have inside the game. And in my notes, I do actually have this slightly different. So I'm just going to change these underscores. So bear with me on that. And with this, we can just go ahead and go inside Unity and press play. And then essentially everything should be working. So I can move around my player. When I hit the space key, I'm going to take damage, which is not debugging. Of course, we do also need to add the player behavior onto my player. So we're going to go ahead and do that so we can actually do something with it. And then we're going to press play and move around inside the game. And as you can see, we can move around. I can actually deselect so it becomes a little bit smoother. And when I press the space key, I'll take damage. And now I can see my health says 80. I'm going to do it again. And then I have health set to 60. If I press the shift key, it's going to heal me. And I now have 17 health. I'm going to heal again, 80. 90, I take damage, and now I have 70. So like that, we're now taking damage and we're doing all that stuff. And now you do actually have a health system created inside your game. And just like I said, just to mention it again, if you want to create health for an enemy or another unit inside the game that isn't in the game manager globally controlling of the game, then you just go ahead and take this particular line of code where you instantiate that particular unit health class to be created, and you just go ahead and paste it inside whatever other enemy behavior script you might have and instantiate it in here instead. And then you can just reference to that inside this class here. So that's how you would actually create health for enemies or for anything else inside the game. So with all of this is how you create a health system. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to actually build a health bar that actually goes up and down. So it actually, instead of just outputting into the console, which isn't very visual inside the game, we're actually going to be able to see the health inside a health bar. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.